Okay, so today we're gonna talk about sensory nerve supply of the face. The face is majorly supplied through divisions of the trigeminal nerve. This area through the ophthalmic division, this area through the maxillary division, and this area through the mandibular division. So beginning with this area, the ophthalmic division of the trigeminal nerve gives three branches. The first one being frontal nerve. From the frontal nerve, we've got two branches, the supratrochlea and supraorbital nerves. We can say that this is the medial and the lateral branches of the supraorbital, but for the exam, if there's a spot on this or this, we'd say that it's the supraorbital. Okay, and again on this side, this is supratrochlea and supraorbital. We can regard this as supratrochlea also. This is from the frontal nerve. From the nasociliary nerve, which is another branch of the ophthalmic division, we've got the infratrochlear nerve. This is the infratrochlear nerve, and this is the external nasal nerve on the septal cartilage. External nasal nerve. Actually, the nasociliary nerve in the orbit gives off the anterior and posterior ethmoidal nerves. Okay, so the anterior ethmoidal nerve passing through the anterior ethmoidal foramen, and the posterior ethmoidal nerve passing through the posterior ethmoidal foramen. From the anterior ethmoidal foramen, we've got this nerve, which is the external nasal nerve. Okay, so we can say that the external nasal nerve is also a branch of the nasociliary nerve. And then the third branch of the ophthalmic division is lacrimal nerve. Lacrimal actually is not obvious here. It could be here or here, but it's not obvious here. Now, about sensory nerve supply of this region, it's through the maxillary division of the trigeminal nerve. This is the infraorbital nerve, passing through the infraorbital foramen, and this is the maxillary nerve itself, passing through the infraorbital canal to become the infraorbital nerve. And of course the supraorbital nerve passes through the supraorbital foramen or notch. Again, from the maxillary division, we've got these two nerves, this one being the zygomatico-temporal nerve, and this one zygomatico-facial nerve. Okay, so this is zygomatico-temporal, and this is zygomatico-facial. This is not. This is kind of the combination of both of them, so it's not very important. Now, these two nerves originate from the zygomatic nerve. The zygomatic nerve is a branch of the maxillary division of the trigeminal nerve. Now, about sensory nerve supply of this area, it's through the mandibular division of the trigeminal nerve, and it's also worth mentioning that well, kind of here, this is the trigeminal nerve itself, giving off the three branches. This is the ophthalmic division. The ophthalmic, before passing through the supraorbital fissure, gives off the three branches, frontal, lacrimal, and nasociliary. And this is the second one. This is the maxillary division, passing through the foramen rotundum, and this is the third one, the mandibular division, passing through the foramen ovale. And this is the foramen spinosum, for passage of the middle meningeal vessels, or artery specifically. So now talking about sensory nerve supply of this area again. This is here, kind of here somewhere, we've got the mental nerve. The mental nerve being continuation or a branch of the inferior alveolar nerve. The inferior alveolar nerve itself, see, you can see that here actually. These are very small branches of the inferior alveolar nerve. This is the lingual nerve. and this is the inferior alveolar nerve, and this is the chorda tympani nerve, a branch from the facial nerve for testing supply of the anterior two-thirds of the tongue. The lingual nerve will provide the common sensory supply to the anterior two-thirds of the tongue. The inferior alveolar nerve is a branch from the mandibular division of the trigeminal nerve. It enters the mandibular foramen, which leads to the mandibular canal. Okay, and kind of here it gives off the mental nerve, which passes through the mental foramen, and it will continue as the incisive canal. Okay, so that's about that, and it's also worth mentioning that from the inferior alveolar nerve, before passing through the mandibular foramen, it gives off a branch which is called nerve to the mylohyoid. Well, the mylohyoid muscle could be this. It could be this. This could be the mylohyoid muscle. Nerve to mylohyoid supplies this, a branch of the inferior alveolar nerve. But anyways, what's important is the mental nerve, and also we've got the auriculotemporal nerve. This is the auriculotemporal nerve. It has got many branches. Again, a branch of the mandibular division for sensory nerve supply, and also the buccal nerve. This is it. We have to be very careful in here because we've got two versions of buccal nerve. We've got the deep one, which is this, and the superficial one. This is the superficial buccal nerve, and this is the deep buccal nerve. The deep buccal nerve is a branch of the mandibular division for sensory nerve supply. However, the superficial buccal nerve is a branch of the facial nerve for motor supply. About sensory nerve supply of the face, we don't have to forget this area. The area close to the angle of mandible and the parotid gland is not supplied by the trigeminal nerve, but by great auricular nerve. This is the great auricular nerve, a branch of the cervical plexus. And again on this side, I guess you can see that. Okay, so yeah, this is the lesser occipital nerve, but this is the great auricular nerve. Again, the great auricular nerve providing sensory nerve supply to this area of the face. Talking about motor nerve supply to the face, when we say sensory nerve supply, we mean nerve supply to the skin of that region. When we say motor supply, we mean nerve supply to muscles of that region. So the muscles of the face are, of course, muscles of facial expression. They are all supplied through the branches of facial nerve. So these are the branches of facial nerve. The facial nerve itself comes out from the stylomastoid foramen, goes into the parotid gland, and gives off 5 major branches. This is the temporal branches. Okay, temporal branches, zygomatic branches over the zygomatic arch, the buccal branches. So we've got two versions of buccal nerves. This one, this is the superficial one, which is buccal branch of the facial nerve for supply of the buccinata muscle. But this one, the kind of the deeper one, this is buccal branch of the mandibular nerve for sensory nerve supply of part of the skin of the face. And then we've got marginal mandibular or just mandibular branches of the facial nerve, these marginal mandibular branches, and we regard these as the cervical branches, supplying different muscles such as the platysma. About branches of the facial nerve here, These are the temporal branches. This is the zygomatic branch on the zygomatic arch. This is the parotid duct, by the way, it's not a nerve. This is buccal branch of the facial, buccal branch, and this is marginal mandibular or just mandibular branch. And these are again mandibular branches, and these are cervical branches. Okay, cervical branches. This is again the facial nerve on the other side, coming out of the stylomastoid foramen, dividing into two branches. But then these two branches will give off 5 major branches: temporal branches, zygomatic branch. See, this one is zygomatic branch, but these others are temporal branches. This is the buccal branch, marginal mandibular branches, and this could be cervical branch. This could be buccal branches from the mandibular nerve for sensory nerve supply, and again here this could be buccal branches of the mandibular nerve. Now talking about the arterial supply of the face, but before that there are some important structures in here, just as an overview. This is the external carotid artery. From there we've got the very first branch, which is the superior thyroid artery. Okay, and this could be the superior laryngeal artery. Now as we go above, we'll have the facial artery. This is the facial artery. See, if you can focus that. Okay, this is the facial artery, a branch of the external carotid artery. It goes like that, facial, and to the inferior border of the body of the mandible. Okay, this is facial. Before the facial artery, we've got the lingual artery from the external carotid, but that's not been shown. Anyway, now this is anterior belly of the digastric, attaching to the digastric fossa on the base of the mandible, and this is its posterior belly attaching to the digastric groove. But this one is the stylohyoid muscle from the styloid process to the hyoid bone. So this is the hyoid bone itself, and this is lateral pterygoid muscle. These are actually muscles of mastication. We'll talk about that later on. See, this is also associated with the temporomandibular joint, and this is the medial pterygoid muscle. And by the way, this is a cut buccinata. Okay, this is buccinata. It's been cut, and now these are the two terminal branches of the external carotid artery. We've got the maxillary artery and superficial temporal artery. From the maxillary artery, we've got many branches, but this is the middle meningeal artery. See, I can focus in here. This is the middle meningeal artery, which passes through the foramen spinosum. Okay, and here this is, as we said, the superficial temporal artery, and this is the transverse facial artery. Going on the zygomatic arch, and of course we've got other branches. For example, this is the posterior auricular artery, again from the external carotid artery, posterior auricula, and this could be the occipital artery. Okay, occipital artery, again a branch of the external carotid. It will go like that into here. See, this is again the occipital artery. Now, specifically talking about arterial supply of the face, it's majorly through the facial artery and the superficial temporal artery. From the superficial temporal artery, we've got the transverse facial artery, and on this side, again, from the superficial temporal artery, we've got the transverse facial artery. But we don't have to confuse it with the other branches. For example, this is the zygomatico-orbital artery because it goes to the orbit, zygomatico-orbital from the superficial temporal. And these are, of course, the frontal and parietal branches. But the branch that supplies the face is the transverse facial artery. About the facial artery, it gives off many branches, but the branches that supply the face are firstly the segmental artery. The segmental artery could be somewhere here. Yes, somewhere here, but it's really not very obvious. And then, as it goes above, it gives off, it's better on this side, it gives off the inferior labial, see? This is the inferior labial and superior labial arteries, branches from the facial. Okay, so this is facial itself, see? This is the facial artery, deep to the platysma and to the risorius, and again deep to the zygomaticus major and minor. And again, we can see that here, facial artery. So as it goes above, it gives off the lateral nasal, see? This is the lateral nasal artery, and this is the facial artery. As it gives off the lateral nasal, it will become angular artery. So this is the angular artery. The angular artery will then anastomose with the branches from internal carotid. So here we've got, as we said, the supratrochlear artery. Again, this could be the supratrochlear artery and the supraorbital artery. These two are branches from the ophthalmic artery, which is a branch of the internal carotid artery. So again, maybe you can see that here. This is the internal carotid artery passing through the carotid groove, and then becoming the ophthalmic artery to pass through the optic canal. Okay, so as we said, the angular artery will anastomose with the supratrochlear and supraorbital arteries. Other branches from the ophthalmic artery that supplies the face are lacrimal artery and zygomatico-temporal and also zygomatico-facial arteries, but seriously we can't see any of those here. This is the inferior labial artery. It anastomoses with the mental artery, which comes out from the mental foramen as a branch of the inferior alveolar artery, which is itself a branch of the maxillary artery. This is the facial artery. It anastomoses with the infraorbital artery, which comes out from the infraorbital foramen as a branch from the maxillary artery. About venous drainage of the face, we begin with the supratrochlear and supraorbital veins. Of course, we can see almost none of them here, but it's just good to have an overview. The supratrochlear and supraorbital veins at the medial margin of the orbit, they form the angular vein. The supraorbital vein will anastomose with branches from the superior ophthalmic vein, which is a branch from the ophthalmic vein, which has itself originated from the cavernous sinus. So the angular vein will come down to form the facial vein. The facial vein, of course, receives many tributaries, such as the lateral nasal vein, superior and inferior labial veins, and it will anastomose with infraorbital vein and mental vein. The mental vein, of course, a continuation of the inferior alveolar vein, and which is a branch of the maxillary vein, and the infraorbital vein, again a branch of the maxillary vein. And by the way, here we can see both infraalveolar arteries and veins. See, This is inferior alveolar nerve. The red one inferior alveolar artery, and the blue one inferior alveolar vein. Okay. So after receiving those tributaries, the facial vein, kind of here, the facial vein will unite with anterior division of the retromandibular vein. So let's talk about how the anterior division of the retromandibular vein is formed. This is the superficial temporal vein. It has got parietal and frontal branches, and it also has got a tributary, which is the transverse facial vein, and also another tributary above, which is the zygomatico-orbital vein, but that's not very important. And then when the maxillary vein comes, it will unite with the superficial temporal vein to form the retromandibular vein. The retromandibular vein gives off the anterior and posterior branches. The anterior branch with the facial vein forming the common facial vein draining into the internal jugular vein. The internal jugular vein lying beneath the sternocleidomastoid, and the posterior division of the retromandibular vein will unite with the posterior auricular vein, with the posterior division of the retromandibular vein, forming the external jugular vein. A tributary of the external jugular vein is the anterior jugular vein. They are all superficial, and they all lie superficial to the sternocleidomastoid muscle. This is infraorbital neurovascular bundle, and this is the superficial temporal artery. From there, we've got the transverse facial artery. This is the facial artery in front of the facial vein. This is the facial artery, and it goes into here also. See, that's it. This is the facial artery. From the facial artery here, we've got this submental artery as a content of the submandibular triangle. Submental artery. Kind of here we also have artery to mylohyoid or mylohyoid artery. But if there's a spot on this, we'd say that this is the submental artery anyway. This is, as we said, the facial vein. From the facial vein, we've got the submental vein. Okay, and then the facial vein with the anterior division of the retromandibular vein will form the common facial vein. The common facial vein will then drain back into the internal jugular vein. So this is the internal jugular vein. Okay, and this is the external carotid artery. Now here, this could be the superior thyroid veins. See, superior thyroid veins from the internal jugular vein. These are superior thyroid arteries from the external carotid artery, and this could be the superior laryngeal artery. This is facial artery, facial vein. The facial vein with the anterior division of the retromandibula will form common facial. The common facial will then go into the internal carotid vein, but the posterior division of the retromandibula is not obvious here. Now we're going to talk about muscles of the head. Firstly, we've got muscle of the scalp. It's only one muscle, and that's the occipitofrontalis muscle. It has got two bellies. In front, it has got the frontal belly, which is called the frontalis muscle. And by the way, again here, we can actually see the occipital belly of the occipitofrontalis. That's it. Now, the occipitofrontalis is supplied through the facial nerve. The muscles of facial expression are 17 in number, and we're going to go through them, inshallah. So let's firstly begin with muscles that are connected to the orbital opening. Firstly, we've got the orbicularis oculi. It has got two parts, the palpebral part and also the orbital part. Next, we've got the corrugator supercilii. Okay, this is the corrugator supercilii. Okay, now about muscles that are connected to the nasal opening. We've got the procerus. This is the procerus here, procerus muscle, and we've got the nasalis muscle. The nasalis actually has got two parts. This is the transverse part of the nasalis, which is also called compressor nasi. This is the alar part of the nasalis, which is also called dilata naris. Now, talking about muscles that are connected to the oral opening, we've got the orbicularis oris. If you can get closer, this is orbicularis oris surrounding the oral opening, and it acts as a compressor that puts both lips together. Okay, so it compresses them. But we've got a group of dilata muscles of the lips. These dilata muscles separate the lips from together. This is the levator labii superioris aliquinasi. This is levator labii superioris. This is zygomaticus minor. Okay, so these are actually two muscles. The medial one is levator labii superioris, the lateral one being zygomaticus minor, and the most medial one that is connected to the nose is called levator labii superioris aliquinasi. Here we've got the zygomaticus major. In between we've got the levator anguli oris, which is deep. Levator anguli oris, connected to the angle of the mouth. This is risorius. This is buccinata. It's not a dilata muscle of the lip, but it's worth mentioning. It's also one of the muscles of facial expression. It's deep, buccinata. Now this is mentalis. Mentalis. This is depressor labii inferioris. This is depressor anguli oris, again connected to the angle of the mouth. This is platysma. It's not one of the muscles that dilate the lips, but it is one of the muscles of facial expression. The platysma actually is also considered one of the muscles of the neck. Platysma. Now talking about the muscles of mastication, we've got the masseter muscle. See, this is masseter muscle. It's close with the parotid gland, and this is the parotid duct, by the way. This is masseter, and we've got temporalis here. It's a very large muscle, temporalis, with a very large tendon. Okay, and we've got medial and lateral pterygoid muscles. We can see that better here, as we've also said earlier. This is the lateral pterygoid. See, yeah, that's it. This is the lateral pterygoid and medial pterygoid muscles. The lateral one is associated with the temporomandibular joint, so that's how we can differentiate between the two. These four muscles of mastication are supplied through the mandibular division of the trigeminal nerve, passing through the foramen ovale, of course. And the muscles of facial expression are all supplied through the facial nerve, which is the seventh cranial nerve coming out of the stylomastoid foramen. About muscles of the head on this model, muscle of the scalp is occipitofrontalis, and this is the frontal belly. Kind of, you can see some fibers. About the occipital belly, again, we can see some fibers here. Now, muscles of facial expression, we have orbicularis oculi, the orbital part and the palpebral part. We have corrugator supercilii somewhere here. It's really not very obvious. That is about the eye. About the nose, we have procerus. We have transverse nasalis, which is also called compressor nasi. Here somewhere we've got alar part of the nasalis, or dilata naris. Okay, now about the mouth, we've got the orbicularis oris for depression, and for dilation we've got a group of muscles. This is levator labii superioris elaquinasi. This one is levator labii superioris. This one is zygomaticus minor, zygomaticus major. Here, kind of in between, deeper, is the levator anguli oris. Okay, levator anguli oris to the angle of the mouth. And here, this could be cut head of the risorius. Here, risorius. This could also be part of the risorius. I'm really not sure. Okay, and here we've got mentalis, V-shaped kind of, both mentalis muscles. This is depressor labii inferioris, depressor anguli oris, again angle of the mouth. Okay, we have buccinata, which is deep kind of here, but it's really not obvious. And we also have platysma, of course, if you can see that. Not really, we can't see platysma either. Now about muscles of mastication, this is masseter muscle. This is temporalis muscle. Temporalis, see, that's it. This is tendon. We also have medial and lateral pterygoid muscles, but we can't see those here. This is the common carotid artery. This is the external carotid artery giving off many branches. This is the internal carotid artery. Internal carotid artery having no branches. Again, this is the internal carotid artery. We've got 8 branches from the external carotid artery. We've got 2 terminal ones, which are the maxillary artery and also superficial temporal, which is not obvious here. From the maxillary, we've got the middle meningeal artery passing through the foramen spinosum. Okay. Yes, this is the foramen spinosum, and this is the middle meningeal artery. All right. Okay, and then we've got 6 other branches, 3 of them anterior, 2 of them posterior, and 1 in the middle. The 3 anterior are superior thyroid artery, this one, superior thyroid, and we've got lingual. This could be the lingual. This could be the lingual one. And then the facial. This could be the facial. This one, facial. Okay, and then from the facial we've got some mental artery. All right. This was the 3 anterior. In the middle we've got ascending pharyngeal, but it's really not very obvious, I guess. Okay, and then to the posterior we've got occipital artery, which could be this occipital artery, and also we have posterior auricula, which could be this one. See, this very small one here. Posterior auricula, again, this is the continuation. It's really very thin. Okay, well, actually this one could be the ascending pharyngeal, or maybe the posterior auricula. It's really not very obvious. This is the inferior thyroid artery, supplying the inferior part of the thyroid gland from the thyrocervical trunk, from the first part of the subclavian artery. Again, this is the inferior thyroid artery, but this is the superior thyroid artery. This is the arch of aorta. To the right side, we've got the brachiocephalic artery. From there, we'll have common carotid and subclavian arteries. To the left side, we don't have brachiocephalic. We've got directly the common carotid and subclavian arteries. This one is superior vena cava. From there, we've got brachiocephalic vein. From there, we've got subclavian and internal jugular veins. Again, it's the same to the other side. This one is inferior thyroid vein from the brachiocephalic for venous drainage of the thyroid gland. Okay, and what's important to know is parts of the subclavian artery. It's divided into three parts by the scalenus anterior. The medial one is the first part. The one behind it is the second part, and the one lateral to it is the third part. From the third part of the subclavian artery, we have no branches. From the second one, we've got the costocervical trunk. From there, we've got deep cervical artery and also superior intercostal artery, but that's really not very important for now. From the first branch, or actually the first part of the subclavian artery, we've got three branches. We've got a vertebral artery. Actually, we can see vertebral artery, I guess. Here it is. This is the vertebral artery, okay, passing through the first 6 transverse foramina. So it will not pass through the transverse foramina of the 7th cervical vertebra. Okay, all right, and then again from the first part of the subclavian artery, we've got the internal thoracic artery. I don't think we can really see that here, and we also have the thyrocervical trunk. From the thyrocervical trunk, we've got the suprascapular and transverse cervical arteries. We have already seen those in the other models, and we also have the inferior thyroid artery. Okay, we can't see that here, but we have seen that on the other models. All right, and by the way, this one is superior thyroid artery supplying the thyroid gland, a branch of the external carotid artery. This is the internal carotid artery. This coming out of the carotid canal and passing over the foramen lacerum, and then passing through the carotid groove in the body of the sphenoid, and then entering the optic canal as the ophthalmic artery. Here are some nerves passing through the jugular foramen. This one is vagus nerve, vagus, cranial nerve 10. This one is glossopharyngeal, cranial nerve 9, glossopharyngeal. And this one is hypoglossal, cranial nerve 12, hypoglossal nerve. Again here, this is vagus, vagus nerve. And this is hypoglossal. Again with this, see, hypoglossal. Because it goes like that. Yeah, that's it, hypoglossal, vagus, and glossopharyngeal. This is the lingual nerve, a branch from the posterior division of the mandibular nerve, which is sensory. And this is the inferior alveolar nerve, again a branch from the posterior division of the mandibular, which is also sensory. But this is a branch from the inferior alveolar nerve, which is called nerve to mylohyoid, and this one is motor. Again on this side, this is the lingual nerve, inferior alveolar and nerve to mylohyoid. And this could be buccal branch of the facial nerve for supply of the buccinata muscle. This is the posterior superior alveolar nerve, one of the branches of the maxillary nerve, for supply of some of the upper teeth. This is the mandibular nerve, the third division of the trigeminal nerve. This passes through the foramen ovale. It has got a very short trunk. From the trunk, we've got two branches. One of them is sensory, which is called the meningeal branch of the mandibular nerve. It will re-enter the cranial cavity by passing through the foramen spinosum, and it's a sensory supply to the meninges. The other branch from the main trunk is nerve to medial pterygoid muscle, It's motor, of course. Okay. Now it will then divide into two major divisions, anterior and posterior divisions. From the anterior division of the mandibula, we've got mostly motor branches and one sensory. The sensory actually is a buccal branch, which is not obvious here. About the motor, we have nerve to lateral pterygoid muscle, we have nerve to masseter, and we also have temporal nerve for supply of the temporalis muscle. About the posterior division of the mandibular, we've got mostly sensory branches and one motor branch. Now about the sensory ones, we've got lingual nerve, this is it, and we have inferior alveolar nerve. Of course, the inferior alveolar will then continue as the mental nerve for sensory supply of the face of the skin of the face, and the lingual nerve will supply common sensory of the anterior 2/3 of the tongue. Now the nerve to mylohyoid, which is a branch of the inferior alveolar, is motor for supply of the mylohyoid muscle and anterior belly of the digastric. And it's also worth mentioning that the chorda tympani nerve, which is a branch from the facial nerve, will supply the special sensory, which is tasting, of the anterior 2/3 of the tongue, but the common and special sensory supply of the posterior 1/3 of the tongue is through the lingual branch from the glossopharyngeal nerve. This is the sphenoidal ear sinus. Again, this is the maxillary sinus. Okay. About muscles of the head, this is frontalis. This is orbicularis oculi, palpebral part, and orbital part. Here somewhere we have corrugator supercilia, but it's really not very obvious. Procerus, kind of here transverse nasalis or compressor nasi. Again here maybe dilator naris or a large part of the nasalis. This is levator labii superioris elaquinasi. This is levator labii superioris. Okay, and this is buccinata. Pierced by the parotid duct. Buccinata. This is inferior labii inferioris, mentalis, depressor angulioris. This one is levator angulioris. Okay. Now about zygomaticus minor, major, and risorius, they really don't seem very obvious here. And of course, this is orbicularis oris. Infraorbital neurovascular bundle. This is the infraorbital artery, infraorbital nerve. Well, again, these are arteries. Well, this is really generally the infraorbital neurovascular bundle. This is the lateral pterygoid and medial pterygoid muscles.